The return. The Varathian warship Eternal Dominance emerged from fold space at the edge of Earth's solar system, its crystalline hull reflecting the distant sun like a shard of captured starlight. Commander Zephyros stood on the observation deck, his silver eyes fixed on the small blue world that hung in the darkness like a forgotten jewel. 6,000 years had passed since his ancestors had last visited this primitive planet, and the time for harvest had finally arrived. Zephyros remembered the ancient recordings stored in the Varathian archives. The humans of old had been simple creatures, living in crude shelters made of mud and stone. They had worshipped fire as magic and fled in terror when the Varathian scouts descended from the heavens. They had been perfect specimens for the long-term cultivation project, weak enough to control, numerous enough to be valuable, and isolated enough that no other species would interfere with their development. The Varathian Empire had perfected the art of biological cultivation over millennia. They would find primitive worlds, introduce beneficial genetic modifications to the native species, and then leave them to multiply for thousands of years. When the population reached optimal numbers, the Varathians would return to harvest the species for various purposes: labor, biological research, or integration into the Empire's vast workforce. It was efficient and it had worked flawlessly across hundreds of worlds. "Navigator," Zephyros commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of military service, "bring us within scanning range of the third planet. I want complete sensor sweeps of all major population centers." The navigator, a younger Varathian named Telra, activated the long-range sensors. Within moments, her confident expression transformed into one of confusion. "Commander, I'm detecting anomalies. The readings don't match our historical data." Zephyros moved to her station, his tall frame casting a shadow across the holographic displays. "What kind of anomalies?" "Massive energy signatures in orbit around Earth. Artificial structures, dozens of them. And there are ships, Commander. Thousands of vessels moving between the planet and its moon. The technology appears to be..." She paused, rechecking her instruments. "Advanced. Far more advanced than it should be." A cold sensation crept through Zephyros's body. This was impossible. The humans were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to still be using basic tools and living in simple agricultural societies. They certainly weren't supposed to have spacefaring capabilities. "Show me," he demanded. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying Earth in stunning detail. But this was not the Earth from the archives. Encircling the planet was a network of massive space stations, their surfaces bristling with structures that could only be weapons systems. Sleek warships patrolled the orbital lanes, their designs unlike anything in the Varathian database. On the moon's surface, sprawling settlements glowed with the light of advanced civilization. Zephyros felt his 3 hearts beat faster. "Scan the entire solar system. I need to know the extent of their expansion." The results came back within minutes, and they were even more disturbing. Human colonies existed on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and in settlements throughout the asteroid belt. Deep space sensors detected human energy signatures in star systems beyond Sol, indicating faster-than-light capability. The total human population wasn't the expected few hundred million. It was over 50 billion, spread across multiple worlds. "This is a contamination scenario," Zephyros said, his voice tight with concern. "Another species must have interfered with our cultivation project. There's no other explanation." But even as he spoke the words, he saw the evidence that contradicted them. The ship designs were uniquely human in proportion and aesthetic. The architectural styles visible on the space stations reflected cultural elements from various human civilizations. The communication frequencies carried human languages. This wasn't contamination. This was indigenous development on a scale that should have been impossible. "Commander," the communications officer interrupted, "we're being hailed on multiple frequencies. The messages are in what appears to be a unified human language, but our translators are having difficulty with the syntax. It's far more complex than the primitive languages in our database." "Put it through," Zephyros ordered. The view screen changed to show a human face. She was a woman with dark skin marked by age, her hair steel gray, her eyes sharp with intelligence. She wore a uniform covered in symbols and decorations that suggested high military rank. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, carrying no trace of the fear Zephyros had expected. "Attention, Varathian vessel. This is Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. You have entered the sovereign space of the Terran Federation. State your intentions immediately." Zephyros was momentarily speechless. The human spoke with authority, with confidence, with the bearing of someone who commanded respect rather than begged for survival. There was no fear in her eyes, only cold calculation. He composed himself quickly. I am Commander Zephyros of the Varathian Empire. 6,000 of your years ago, my people came to your world and planted the seeds of your civilization. We shaped your genetic code. We gave you the capacity for intelligence and culture. You exist because we designed you to exist. Now the cultivation period has ended, and we have returned to claim what is rightfully ours. He paused, expecting panic, expecting desperate pleas. Instead, Admiral Chen's expression remained unchanged. If anything, she looked almost bored. We have 60 hours to comply with your demands, or you will initiate forced harvest procedures, Zephyros continued. This is not a negotiation. This is an explanation of reality. You are a cultivated species. You belong to the Varathian Empire by right of creation. For a long moment, silence filled the communication channel. Then Admiral Chen smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who held cards their opponent couldn't see. Commander Zephyros, she said, I want you to understand something very important. Yes, we know about your visits to ancient Earth. Yes, we know about your genetic modifications. We've known for over 300 years, ever since we developed faster-than-light travel and started exploring the galaxy. We've found the ruins of other species you cultivated and harvested. We've read their final messages carved into stone, warning anyone who might come after them. We've studied your technology from the wreckage you left behind. We've learned everything about you. She leaned forward, her eyes boring into the camera. And we've been preparing for this day since we first understood what you did to us. We've built our entire civilization around one single purpose, making sure that when you came back you would regret it. The transmission ended abruptly. Zephyros stood frozen, processing what he had just heard. Around him, his bridge crew exchanged uncertain glances. This was beyond anything in their training, beyond anything in their species' long history of cultivation and harvest. Commander, Telra said quietly, the human fleet is moving. Multiple contacts breaking orbit from Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies. They're forming attack formations. Zephyros's military instincts took over. Battle stations. Activate defensive shields. Bring the weapons systems online. Send an emergency signal to the fleet. Tell them we have a hostile situation and require immediate support. The Varathian warship came alive with activity as crew members rushed to their positions. The Eternal Dominance was a formidable vessel, equipped with weapons that could devastate continents and shields that could withstand direct impacts from asteroids. It had never been defeated in combat. No cultivated species had ever posed a threat to Varathian military superiority. The human ships appeared on the tactical display, dozens of them at first, then hundreds. They were smaller than the Varathian warship, but they moved with purpose and coordination that spoke of extensive training and experience. They weren't fleeing. They weren't cowering in their orbital stations. They were attacking. Incoming transmission on all frequencies, the communications officer announced. It's a broadcast to all Varathian vessels in the system. Admiral Chen's face appeared again on every screen throughout the ship. People of Earth and all human colonies, she said, today the Varathians have returned, expecting to find helpless prey. They expect us to submit to slavery and harvesting. They expect us to accept that we are property to be collected. I have only one question for every human listening to this broadcast. What is our answer? The response came not from the bridge speakers, but from every human vessel in the system, broadcasting in unison, never again. The words echoed through space, carried on radio waves and quantum communication channels. They were simple words, but they carried the weight of 6,000 years of collective memory, of stories passed down through generations, of nightmares that had haunted humanity's children, of a promise that when the monsters returned, they would find not victims but warriors. The first human ships opened fire. Zephyros watched in growing horror as energy weapons he didn't recognize tore through space toward his vessel. The shields held, but the impact readings were far higher than they should have been. These weren't primitive weapons. These were sophisticated military systems designed by a species that had studied Varathian technology and developed specific countermeasures. Return fire, he ordered. Target their command ships. Show them the price of defiance. The Varathian weapons systems activated, unleashing beams of concentrated plasma that had destroyed countless targets across the galaxy. But the human ships didn't try to flee from the onslaught. Instead, they scattered in complex patterns, moving with agility that seemed impossible for vessels of their size. Some ships took hits and exploded in brilliant flashes, But the others kept coming, kept firing, kept pressing the attack with a ferocity that Zephyros had never encountered. A human destroyer, its hull scarred by weapon impacts and trailing atmosphere from a breach, accelerated directly toward the Eternal Dominance. Zephyros recognized the maneuver immediately, a suicide run, an attempt to ram the Varathian flagship. He had seen desperate species try such tactics before, always in the final moments before their inevitable defeat. "Destroy that vessel," he commanded. Multiple weapon systems targeted the approaching destroyer. Energy beams struck it repeatedly, tearing through armor and rupturing internal systems. The ship should have died. Any rational crew would have evacuated. But the destroyer kept coming, its engines burning at maximum thrust even as secondary explosions tore through its structure. At the last moment, the destroyer's captain transmitted a final message. It was just 2 words, spoken by a human voice filled not with fear but with savage joy: "Worth it." The destroyer struck the Eternal Dominance at full velocity, its detonating reactor punching through the Varathian shields and gouging a massive wound in the warship's crystalline hull. Atmosphere vented into space. Systems throughout the ship went offline. Emergency alarms wailed as damage control teams rushed to contain the breaches. Zephyros gripped his command station to keep from falling as the ship shuddered. Through the chaos, one thought dominated his mind: these humans were supposed to be prey. Prey didn't fight like this. Prey didn't sacrifice themselves willingly to damage predators. Prey ran and hid and begged for mercy. But as he watched more human ships press their attack, as he saw vessels with names like Defiant and Retribution and Never Forget carved into their hulls, Zephyros realized the terrible truth. The Varathians had made a fundamental error in their calculations. They had given humanity too much time. They had left them alone long enough to develop, to remember, to prepare. And in doing so, they had created not livestock to be harvested, but an enemy that would fight until the last human fell. The Battle of Sol had begun, and Commander Zephyros was beginning to understand that his species might have awakened something far more dangerous than they could handle. The stand. The war room beneath Geneva's mountains hummed with activity as holographic displays painted the walls with streams of tactical data. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chin stood at the center of the chamber, her eyes moving across the 3-dimensional battlefield map that floated before her. Each blue dot represented a human vessel. Each red dot was a Varathian ship. And right now there were far too many red dots. "Status report," she commanded, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos. Commander Marcus Webb, her tactical officer, stepped forward. He was a veteran of the Belt Wars, a conflict that had taught humanity how to fight in the unforgiving environment of space. His face was lined with scars from a hull breach on Europa Station, reminders of battles that had prepared them for this exact moment. "The Varathian flagship is damaged but still operational. We've destroyed 6 of their escort vessels, but they're adapting to our tactics faster than projected. Our losses stand at 43 ships destroyed, another 72 damaged. But we're holding the line at the orbital defense perimeter." Sarah nodded, her expression grim. Every lost ship meant hundreds of dead crew members, but they had known the cost would be high. This wasn't a war that could be won without sacrifice. And the civilian evacuations? 97% complete. The remaining populations are in the deep shelters. They'll survive even if the Varathians break through. "They won't break through," Sarah said with absolute certainty. "What's the status of Operation Prometheus?" Webb's scarred face split into a dangerous grin. "The stealth ships are in position. The Varathians still don't know they're there. We're ready to execute on your command." Sarah turned back to the holographic display, watching the Varathian fleet regroup after the initial engagement. Commander Zephyros was competent, she'd give him that. He had pulled his damaged flagship back behind a screen of escort vessels and was consolidating his forces. He was probably calling for reinforcements, probably reporting to his superiors that the harvest had encountered unexpected resistance. Let him call, she thought. Let them send everything they have. Humanity had spent 3 centuries preparing for this war. They had built weapons the Varathians couldn't imagine. They had developed tactics that defied conventional military doctrine. And most importantly, they had something the Varathians with all their technological superiority could never possess. They had nothing left to lose. "Admiral," a voice called from the communications station. "We're receiving a transmission from the Varathian flagship. Commander Zephyros wants to negotiate." Sarah felt a flash of contempt. Now they wanted to talk. Now that they'd realized humans could actually fight back, suddenly they were interested in negotiation. "Put him through." The hologram shifted to show Commander Zephyros. His silver eyes were harder now, the arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like respect. Behind him, Sarah could see Varathian crew members working frantically to repair battle damage. Good. Let him see that humans could hurt them. Admiral Chen, Zephyros began, his voice carefully controlled. This conflict serves no purpose. You have proven that humanity is more advanced than we anticipated. The Varathian Empire can acknowledge this and adjust our relationship accordingly. There is no need for further bloodshed. Sarah let the silence stretch for a moment, letting him feel the weight of her contempt. Let me make sure I understand you correctly, Commander. You came to our solar system intending to enslave our entire species. You announced your intention to harvest us like cattle. You gave us 60 hours to surrender to slavery. And now that we've bloodied your nose, you want to negotiate. Zephyros's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw the tension in his posture. The situation has evolved. The Varathian Empire is prepared to offer humanity a partnership rather than cultivation. You would maintain your autonomy while benefiting from our advanced technology and our position in the galactic community. Partnership, Sarah repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The same partnership you offered the Cadalians? We found their ruins on Proxima Centauri 4. We read their final messages. They thought they were negotiating with you too, right up until the moment you harvested them. The Cadalians were different. They lacked the capability to fight back. Sarah interrupted. That's the difference, isn't it? You're willing to negotiate now because we can hurt you. Because your casualties are mounting and your flagship is damaged. Because you're starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, you made a terrible mistake coming here. She leaned forward, her eyes boring into his. Here's my counteroffer, Commander Zephyros. You have 60 minutes to leave our solar system. Take your damaged fleet and run back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Tell your empire that Earth is closed for business. Tell them that if they ever come back, we will destroy every ship they send. And if they persist, we will find their homeworld and show them exactly what humanity learned from 6,000 years of nightmares. Zephyros's silver eyes flashed with anger. You cannot threaten the Varathian Empire. We have existed for millennia. We have conquered hundreds of species. You are one species on one small world. You cannot possibly. 60 minutes, Sarah said coldly. Starting now. She terminated the transmission. Marcus Webb whistled low. That was quite the speech, Admiral. But you realize he's not going to leave, right? The Varathians don't retreat. Their entire culture is built on the idea that they're the apex species in the galaxy. I know, Sarah said. That's why we're going to teach them a lesson they'll never forget. Execute Operation Prometheus. Throughout the solar system, hidden vessels that had been drifting silently for weeks suddenly came to life. They were small craft, barely larger than fighters, each one crewed by a single pilot who had volunteered for a mission they knew would be one way. They had been called the Prometheus Squadron, named for the ancient Greek titan who had stolen fire from the gods and given it to humanity. The Varathians had fire. Now humanity was going to take it. Lieutenant James Morrison sat in the cockpit of Prometheus 7, watching his targeting computer lock onto the Varathian battlecruiser Infinite Glory. The vessel was massive, easily 10 times the size of any human warship, its crystalline hull glowing with accumulated energy from its shield systems. Under normal circumstances, it would take dozens of human ships to threaten such a vessel. But these weren't normal circumstances. All Prometheus pilots, this is Control. Admiral Chen's voice came through his helmet comm. You are cleared to engage. Godspeed to all of you. Humanity will remember your sacrifice. James smiled. He was 26 years old, born on Mars, raised on stories of the Varathian threat. His great-grandmother had been one of the first humans to find evidence of the Varathians on an alien world. She had spent her entire life warning humanity to prepare, and she had lived just long enough to see the first Prometheus craft completed. This was for her. This was for every human who had lived in fear of the sky. This was for the children who would grow up in a universe where humanity was no longer prey. Prometheus 7 engaging, James said calmly. He pushed his throttle to maximum. The stealth ship accelerated, burning through space at speeds that would have torn apart conventional vessels. The Varathians finally detected it, their weapons systems swinging to target the small craft. Energy beams lanced through space, but James had trained for this. He juked and weaved, pushing his ship through maneuvers that strained the structural integrity to its limits. The Varathian battlecruiser grew larger in his viewport. He could see individual sections now, could see the crew rushing to battle stations, could see the weapon ports opening to fire at him. He didn't care. None of it mattered. All that mattered was the payload tucked in his ship's belly, A gift from humanity's finest scientists, reverse-engineered from Varathian technology and improved with human ingenuity. Impact in 5 seconds, his computer announced. James thought about his family on Mars. He thought about his girlfriend who had begged him not to volunteer. He thought about the future children they would never have. And he thought it was all worth it if this worked. Prometheus, 7 to control. Tell my family I love them. Tell them I died free. He didn't eject. He didn't deviate. He flew straight into the Infinite Glory shield generators at maximum velocity, and in the moment before impact, he triggered the payload. The device was called a cascade disruptor. When it detonated, it didn't just overload the Varathian shields, it turned them into a weapon against their own ship. The energy that had been protecting the battlecruiser suddenly inverted, channeling directly into the vessel's power core. For a single brilliant moment, the Infinite Glory lit up brighter than the sun. Then it exploded. The detonation was so massive it registered on sensors across the solar system. Debris from the battlecruiser spread out in an expanding sphere of molten metal and crystalline fragments. The Varathian ships nearby were damaged by the shockwave. And the message was clear: human pilots were willing to die to destroy their enemies. Across the battlefield, 17 more Prometheus craft executed similar attacks. Not all of them succeeded. Some were destroyed by point defense systems. Some were intercepted by Varathian fighters. But enough got through. Enough found their targets. And when the explosions faded, the Varathian fleet had lost nearly a third of its capital ships. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominance, Commander Zephyros watched his fleet burn and finally understood the magnitude of the Varathian Empire's mistake. These humans weren't just advanced. They weren't just well prepared. They were fundamentally different from any species the Varathians had ever encountered. They fought with a level of ferocity and self-sacrifice that defied all rational analysis. "Commander," Telra said, her voice shaking. "We have multiple fleet elements requesting permission to withdraw. The casualties are catastrophic. Our formations are breaking apart. The humans are pressing their advantage." Zephyros stared at the tactical display, watching blue dots swarm around the remaining red ones. The humans had lost ships too, but they kept coming. For every human vessel destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. They fought like they had nothing to lose because they didn't. They were fighting for survival, for freedom, for revenge against an enemy that had haunted their species' collective memory for 6,000 years. "Send the retreat order," Zephyros said quietly. "All ships are to disengage and prepare for fold space transit. We're leaving this system." "Commander, the Empire will consider this a defeat." "They will." "I don't care what they consider it," Zephyros snapped. "If we stay here, every ship in this fleet will be destroyed. The humans have weapons we didn't know existed. They have tactics we can't counter. And they have something we've never encountered before: they're willing to die to win." He turned to face his crew. "Send a priority message to the Empire. Tell them that Earth is not a cultivation world anymore. Tell them it's a threat. Tell them that if they want to claim this species, they'll need to send everything we have. And tell them." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tell them that even if they do send everything, I'm not sure we'll win." The Eternal Dominance and the surviving Varathian vessels began to retreat toward the edge of the solar system, harried every meter of the way by human fighters and destroyers. The great harvesting fleet that had arrived with such confidence was limping away, broken and defeated. In the war room beneath Geneva, Admiral Sarah Chen watched the Varathian fleet flee and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. But only a moment. She knew this was just the beginning. The Varathians would return, probably with a much larger force. But that was a problem for another day. "All ships, cease pursuit at the Kuiper Belt boundary," she ordered. "Let them go. Let them carry the message back to their empire. Let them tell their leaders what happens when you try to harvest humanity." Commander Webb approached her, his face showing a mix of exhaustion and pride. "We did it, Admiral. We actually did it. We beat them." Sarah nodded slowly. "We won this battle, Marcus. But the war is just beginning. The Varathians won't accept this defeat. They'll come back, and when they do, they'll bring everything they have. Then we'll be ready," Marcus said with confidence. "We've been preparing for 6,000 years. We can prepare a little longer." Sarah smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was genuine. "Yes, we will be ready. And when they come back, we'll teach them the same lesson we taught them today: humanity doesn't break. Humanity doesn't surrender. Humanity fights." She looked at the holographic display one last time, watching the retreating Varathian ships disappear into fold space. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness of the galaxy, An ancient empire was learning that its days of unchallenged dominance were over. They had created humanity, shaped their genetic code, given them intelligence. But they had made one critical mistake. They had left humanity alone long enough to become dangerous. And now, after 6,000 years of silence, after 6,000 years of nightmares and preparation, humanity had sent its message to the galaxy. We will not be harvested. We will not be enslaved. We will not be afraid. Never again. Far from Earth, in the command center of a Varathian fortress world, the High Council received Commander Zephyros's report. They read the casualty figures with disbelief. They watched the recordings of human ships sacrificing themselves without hesitation. They analyzed the weapons that had torn through shields that should have been impenetrable. And for the first time in 50,000 years of unbroken conquest, the Varathian Empire felt something it had never experienced before: uncertainty. One cultivated species had fought back. One harvesting operation had failed. One fleet had retreated in defeat. It was impossible, unthinkable, unacceptable. But it had happened. And across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds where cultivated species lived in fear of the eventual harvest, whispers began to spread. Whispers of a species called humanity that had refused to submit. Whispers of a battle where the harvesters had been beaten. Whispers that maybe, just maybe, the Varathian Empire was not invincible after all. The harvest of Earth had failed. But more than that, it had started something that the Varathian Empire had never faced before: hope. Hope that resistance was possible. Hope that freedom could be won. Hope that the prey could become predators. And hope, once ignited, is impossible to extinguish. Admiral Sarah Chin stood at her window looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Varathians were regrouping, planning, preparing for their next attempt. Let them come. Humanity had waited 6,000 years for this war. They could wait a little longer. But when the Varathians returned, they would find humanity ready. Not as livestock. Not as property. But as warriors who had finally been given the chance to face their ancient fear and overcome it. The age of the harvest was ending. The age of human resistance had begun. And the galaxy would never be the same.